Michael Huber. God, I love talking to Mike. He's a sports mental coach. He's in the sports psychology realm, and I coached my daughters in soccer pre-high school, at the club level, at the travel level, and just the psychology of the athletes. I ask them right away. By the way, where it bridges, where it folds over the sports psychology and mental health. We have the example of the Olympic gymnast, the American gymnast who backed out for mental health. We see it more and more now. It's definitely discussed more now than ever. But it's fascinating take. I don't know how many of you out there remember Chuck Knobloch was a second baseman for the New York Yankees. He couldn't throw at the first anymore in the 90s. I thought of it while we were talking. We talk about that. We also talk about just parenting as well, but psychology is becoming more and more important to the athletes today. They spend so much time on technique, on strength, on the physicality. Why not spend time on the mental aspect? I play a lot of golf now. I talk the difference between, those team sports like soccer, basketball, etc., versus golf, where it's all by yourself and the pressure there. We talk about the yips. We don't even like to say that on the golf course, by the way, but what's involved there. He has a book where he has the top 10 steps to improvement in your mental game. And the first is why. Why are you doing it? The next 9, I'm sure, are going to surprise you. Michael Huberman, great conversation. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Michael Huber, so great to talk to you. I appreciate your time today. So where does sports psychology and mental health of the athlete kind of intersect?
It's a great question. I think they're intertwined. I think the performance is driven, in my personal opinion, is driven
Of
by
course.
somebody's mental health, right? The comfort and the confidence that they have in themselves ultimately translates into better performance.
Mm.
So a big part of what I do is really helping athletes to understand themselves, build self-awareness, to counsel them to sort of be able to recognize their thoughts and feelings to get that performance. But I'm also trained to recognize when a mental health issue is more that goes beyond performance, right? So
Mm.
sometimes I have athletes that have mental health issues in the context of their sport only, right? Like their mental side of their being is impacting them in in the sport context. And then if that seeps over into everyday life, that's sort of where my limits kind of um, come, and I have to refer my athletes out to somebody who does clinical therapy, clinical psychology, a psychiatrist, depending on what the issues are. So I have to recognize it and I have to put them in the right place. So if it's just performance, it's me. And if it's something bigger,
Mm.
it's somebody else.
As we're talking, we're both from the New York area. All of a sudden, Chuck Knobloch came into it. So we're both about the same age. I think I mean, he was a great second baseman, and all of a sudden he couldn't throw the ball to first.
Yes.
I'm a Yankee fan, so it was horrible. But
Yeah.
it was also it's like what's happening to this all-star. I don't know if he's Hall of Fame or not, but this player who just had a breakdown. Otherwise, you see interviews, he's apologetic, he seems to be fine, but just a breakdown in the sport to a
Yeah.
truly professional, elevated athlete.
Yeah, and that's something that most people would call the yips, right?
Right.
Which is a condition that I've actually done a bit of research on because I've had players, particularly baseball players, who've come to me for that reason. And from what I could gather, there's really two types of yips. One is physical, meaning an athlete has some sort of physical response to an
Mm,
injury or
mm,
something that's literally happening in their biomechanics that's they're not able to make a particular throw, right? Maybe they're sort of recovering from an injury and there's been a change in the way they do things, and that's causing their ability to make a throw or do something. It's limiting it, right? But
mm,
then there's the mental side of it, which is there's nothing physically wrong, there's been no injury, there's nothing discernible physically, and they're just reluctant to execute on a throw in this case or at any movement
mm,
because they're questioning their ability to do it. So rather than just doing it naturally, they're kind of creating the block in their mind of saying, like, am I going to be able to do this? And then as a defense mechanism, they're trying to protect themselves from making the mistake, which
mm.
ultimately exacerbates the mistake. And so what I've seen in the limited cases I've dealt with is if somebody's having that experience, the sooner they can start to address it, the better off they're going to be in dealing with it. If you wait a long time and it sort of develops what we would call a neural pathway, like this sort of groove in your brain that says like this is the way that you do it. Once that kind of happens, whenever it does for the person, then it's going to be really hard, or it's going to be much harder to undo. Versus like, hey, I'm noticing this happening now, and like I don't want this to progress, so I'm gonna deal with it. And a lot of times there are just very fundamental ways to help an athlete work through that and develop strategies to make it go away or to
Mm.
limit it or mitigate it.
I think Chuck Knobloch was in the '90s. I
Yes.
mean, are we where we are now? I mean, was it if you were to talk to Chuck now, of course, would you have more tools and more data available to be able to handle that kind of situation better than it was in the '90s?
I mean, I think just by virtue of there being, 25 to 30 years passing, yes, I think we
Mm,
probably understand it a bit better. But I will say this, right? Like, my work is based, or at least I try to base my work in scientific research. And psychology is kind of a tricky field because it's not like you're testing a drug where we have like definitive experiments to say this works or it doesn't. So it's a little more gray than black and white. But there's a lot more research out there in sports psychology in 2023 than there was in
mm,
1995, and there was some then.
hmm,
When I go look for research on the yips, particularly, a lot of it comes out of different countries. Like Japan, for instance, has more research on the yips in baseball than we do in America. And I
really?
think it's still confounding. I think different athletes have tried different things as I understand it. Some of the more high profile ones have gone to clinical psychologists, they've gone to hypnotherapists, they've gone to all sorts of different people to try to solve the problem. And I don't think there's a clear cut way to do it. Right. So I
Mm.
think we're not that much further ahead today than we were in 1998 or 95. But I think we have more awareness around how to help athletes deal with these kinds of mental challenges.
We certainly hear more about it now, Mike. I mean, the case in point, all of a sudden, her name Gabby, the gymnast who backed out of the Olympics,
Yeah.
right? One of the greatest of all time. It looks like she's on her way. She's coming back now. But I mean, that situation right there, that would just be unheard of a while ago.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a greater sensitivity toward having compassion for people who have mental health issues.
Mm,
And I think what's great about that situation that you alluded to, and a lot of people have their opinions on it, right? Some people would
of
say
course.
like, no, you're in the Olympics, you gotta tough it out, right? And some people would say no, like she's really got to care for her mental health first before anything, and everything in between, right? Everyone's going to have an opinion, but being somebody who works in the field and being someone who also has had his own mental health challenges, like that's an issue. Mental health is an issue that only the person who's going through it can truly understand, right? We can all try to understand and we can all try to help or we can all criticize, but really the person who knows is the one who's going through it. In that case, I have to imagine that things were so bad that she was willing to back out,
Mm,
right, of competition after she's worked so hard for 4 years. To me, that's kind of a hint that, hey, like there's
mm.
something that's really struggling. She's struggling with that she got to the point where she's like, I can't do this. And I think that that is something we can all be a little bit better at is being able to express empathy for people who are going through things that we don't really understand. And that's frankly, that's a big part of what I do is trying to put myself into my athlete's shoes so that I can understand where they're coming from and then try to help them solve a problem from their perspective rather than helping them solve a problem based upon what I think is the best way,
Mm.
regardless of what they're going through, which I think happens.
Yeah, and in her particular case, I mean, she's flipping upside down, right? And she's, she's has a collapse there. She could land incorrectly, and
It's a great point.
it's we think of gymnasts as not being dangerous, but I mean, their bodies are up in the air and twisting and folding and flipping, and she has a breakdown like that. My goodness, do athletes often come to you too late? You kind of mentioned before that you got to address it right away.
I think in general, I would say too late is definitely an exaggeration because I always think there's something that you can do, right? It may be sometimes too late from a performance standpoint in the sense that, like, yes, you've kind of gotten yourself into a box and it's really hard to like undo it unless you put a lot of time and effort and energy and you have the patience and the resilience to sort of work through it. But it's definitely never too late in terms of being able to come to peace with the fact that maybe you struggled with your performance because of mental issues and there's a reason why and it's okay and I'm going to move forward in my life and have a way to make sense of it so that I don't suffer for the next 50 years because I retired from my sport and I have this regret that I have never gotten over or this
Mm,
anger that I've now never gotten over. But I think by and large, to answer the question more directly, I would say I think people generally come to me later than they could or should have,
mm,
meaning I think people view working with a mental performance coach or a mental health professional as a means for fixing a problem, which tends to indicate they've tried everything else, right? They've talked to all these other people, they've worked physically through it. They like and they just get to the point where they can't figure it out and they go, okay, like this is the last resort. Otherwise, I'm gonna drive myself crazy. So I'll go talk to the psychology guy. Right. Versus saying, like, hey, this is something I should be working on proactively all the time so that I can avoid, right, these tools. The analogy that I would give, and a lot of us give in the field is would you go to the gym only the day before a game or would you right or
mm,
you go once a week or do you go to the gym every single day? Do you expect your bench press to go from 0 to 300 in one session or does it take 6 months or 5 years, right? Like but like in our field it's like, hey, I got something wrong, can you fix me? And we can in a lot of cases help athletes unwind things they're working on and have a better way forward, but it would be so much easier if it was, hey, there's nothing wrong, I just want to
mm.
work on this part of my game.
And Mike, is your approach different depending on the sport? So I play a lot of golf, and golf is just solitary. I played soccer as a kid. Now I'm much older, Mike, and I'm afraid to get hurt. But at least in soccer and the team sports, you can kind of run and make up for it. But with golf, you're just by yourself and you're solitary. And you talk about the yips. I've known guys. You don't even say that word on the course, of course,
Right.
but on the greens they get the yips, and it's a terrible thing to be witness of. They're just kind of shaking up there. So is your approach different depending on the sport?
uh yes, in the sense that to your point, it's a great question. To your point, like every sport has different demands, right?
Mm,
So a golf is a great example, right? Like it's you versus you, right?
mm,
I mean, in general, right? Like it's your score is relative to you, right? Like you might compare yourself to other people, but you're not like hitting the ball at the same time trying to get the ball into the hole
right,
faster, right?
right.
So you've got more time to think, right? Where you put your attention is really important, right? Like it goes from the target to the ball, it goes from inside your brain to planning the shot to outside your brain onto something external. And that's a lot of that's in your own control. That's very different than playing a sport like soccer where
Mm.
the game is constantly moving, right? And so like sometimes that helps in like a sport like soccer or basketball where okay, I made a mistake, but the game keeps going, so I got to keep up.
You make
But it
up for
all
it quick. Yeah.
yeah, but it can also be a detriment, and this is something I talk to a lot of players in those sports, basketball and soccer particularly, is like, well, you might make a mistake, and yeah, the game keeps going, but your mind doesn't go with it,
Mm.
right? Your mind is still stuck on that last play for the next 5 minutes. Well, if the ball comes back to you and you're thinking about the last play, are you going to make another mistake? Now I've got two mistakes. Then I've got three mistakes, right? So
Mm.
the ability to let that mistake go and get back to the present moment and focus what's happening, what's happening in front of you is can be really, really hard because of the emotion that's tied to the performance, right? So in the example you
Mm.
gave about putting, right? Like the reason why people get nervous on the putting green is because in their mind, they perceive it to be really important. I have to make this putt or else, or
Mm.
because, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, I don't want to mess it up. So like now I'm gonna like procrastinate because I don't want to shoot it
Mm.
because I don't want to see the outcome. And so, like, golf is very different. Baseball kind of has combinations of the two, right? Like, baseball, you're kind of like a golfer when you're at the plate, right? To a
Mm.
certain extent, like you're in your own
Mm.
head. And yeah, someone's pitching to you, but it's just you versus, well, when you're in the field, like there's this combination of things that are happening, right? So, baseball is sort of a hybrid, but I would say it falls more into the golf kind of bucket because of the fact there's so much standing around and waiting and
Mm.
you have
Mm.
time to think, whereas in some other sports you don't always have as much time to think, and that can be a benefit. But I have to take all of that into account, right? In
Mm.
terms of how they operate within the confines of their sport, because I can't give a golfer the same thing to do as somebody who is a soccer player because there
Mm.
are different issues that surround their sport.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I see that a lot of I watch Hard Knocks this year, for example,
Mhm.
and I see they have a team sports psychologist. They actually, I think they have a couple. You see these pro teams having this
Mhm.
more and more now. I don't think that was around 20 years ago. Do we have that in universities as well, in high schools?
So that's another really, really good question. So to start off, I mean, sports psychology, I think, started really in Olympic sports or in individual sports like gymnastics, like in golf. That's sort of where the genesis was, back in the like, mid 1900s, early 1900s, like sort of when it was getting its foundations. And then it found its way to team sport in the US. Baseball sort of has the greatest legacy. So
Mm.
probably in the 80s, more so the 90s, baseball started to incorporate sports psychology into the
Mm.
sport. There were books, there were guys who were sort of like the godfathers of mental performance in baseball, and that's evolved into every team, every league's teams having some awareness or resource around mental health and mental performance. But they're not all created equally. I think there's definitely
Mm.
an evolution and a curve. Now we're starting to see it in colleges as well, where some colleges will have like one person who sort of is the coordinator, right? And they don't necessarily have a staff, but they have maybe a curriculum and they have resources internally, and
Mm.
athletes can opt in and say, hey, I want to go talk to somebody. I can make an appointment to go talk to the sports psychologist, or maybe they're coming out to see a team and they're doing like a team or group activity, um, but they're under resourced. That's one thing I find is that they're under resourced having talked to some of those people because you've got 500, 600 student athletes and there's one or two of you. Like that's not enough for everybody. I mean, even the same in professional sports to some degree. But I think there's also this element which is really interesting. Without getting too specific, I think there's also a distrust in some instances of sports psychology within
Mm.
organizations because those people work for the club and the club is judging you based on performance, or the college is judging you based on performance. And if I'm confiding in a sports psychologist in a sports psychologist, even though that's supposed to be confidential in many instances, I feel like maybe that information is being used against me, or it's getting back to somebody who's got my scholarship or my
Oh.
paycheck. And so I've had athletes who are college athletes, I do, and I have professional athletes as well who come to me and say, "Hey, will you help me because I know you can be objective, and you're not gonna hold my performance over my head. So I do get some work in that aspect. But yes, it's definitely more prevalent, at least through college. High school's a little bit different.
Yeah, I guess we shouldn't be shocked that it comes back to money, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because winning creates money, gets more notoriety and more dollars. Is there a difference between a sports psychologist and a mental coach?
Yes. So, sports psychologist is limited in order for me to call myself a sports psychologist, which I'm not, you have to have a clinical licensure. So,
Mm,
I have to either be a PhD level psychologist, or I have to be, yeah, I have to be a PhD level psychologist, not even having a license. I think you need to be like licensed as a psychologist by the state you're in. So, the state's govern it. Um,
mm,
if I don't have that, then mental performance coach just means I'm qualified to help athletes in the performance realm, but I can't treat them for clinical disorders like general anxiety and depression and ADHD and whatever else comes up. I can't treat that, but I am trained to recognize and refer out. So like that was one of the benefits
mm.
of my training was, hey, like if you see this and you recognize it, like you've got to pass this off to somebody who can treat this person because you can't. So I have to be really careful. I can't call myself a sports psychologist, but I could say I work in the sports psychology field, which is kind of a
Mm.
weird nuance.
Yeah, yeah, it is a weird nuance. I remember we're similar ages, I think. I remember in the '90s you could buy a radar detector for your car, but you couldn't use it. Uh, Anyway,
Yeah, it's about right.
yeah, you could buy. They were on sale everywhere, but if you got caught using it, you would get fined. So I once heard the difference between like a therapist, psychologist versus a coach is that one goes backwards and the other goes forward. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think coaches are definitely more focused on achieving goal achievement, let's say, right? I want to get somewhere and I can't do it by myself. I want to have you come in and help me get there. Whereas a therapist, right, would be somebody who's really helping somebody heal trauma. Now, right, like something that's happened in the past that it's unresolved and I want to make sense of it, but I don't necessarily have any objective other than to kind of be okay with myself and
Mm,
with that. But I will say this, I think one of the elements of my work is that we do need to go backwards, right? We're not necessarily trying to heal somebody going backwards and trying to like help them sort of resolve like an unresolved issue. I mean, if we can, that would be great, but that would largely be happenstance. But I think understanding patterns of behavior and patterns in relationships and patterns in thinking is really important for us to look at situations and say, like, okay, when this person's around and says this is what happens to your performance,
mm,
right? If we take that person out of the equation or that person doesn't say or do what's triggering you, then maybe your performance is going to improve, right? So,
mm,
really trying to recognize those patterns so that we can then, for lack of a better word, engineer or curate like situations and strategies and approaches so that you put yourself in a better position to succeed. It doesn't guarantee it, but it certainly is a way to test whether or not like some of the things you've been doing aren't serving your best interest.
we mentioned before that, in the sports psychology realm, that the sport you played makes a difference. How about male, female?
That's really interesting. So that's a hard question to tackle, and so there's a lot of different ways to go. Um, I think where I'd start was because I do know this to be true because I've studied it. Is a lot of it with females and males, a big difference is motivation, right? And
Ah,
so in the research on motivation, particularly with young women and young men, we find that young men are more into um, what we would call competence, right? Being good at your sport. Am I good? Am I good relative to others? Am I getting better? Right? Like there's a very big emphasis on like that competitive element, comparing myself to somebody else. For young women, it's more about the connection with who they're playing with.
hmm,
So, do I like who I'm playing with? Do I like my coaches? Am I getting a good feeling from the relationships I'm forming? And if I am, I'm going to keep coming back. Right. So, like,
hmm.
not to say women aren't, they don't emphasize performance and competence, like, but it's just that's a nuanced difference where men would be like, well, I'd rather play on the team where, like, yeah, the coach is an asshole, excuse my language,
Mm,
and but I'm getting better, and like we win, and I don't like my teammates, but I don't care because like this is going to help me get to where I want to go. That's probably more likely a situation where a
mm.
man is going to be comfortable versus a woman who's like, no, I would rather sacrifice those things for a better environment. Again, a generalization, but I think it's fairly accurate, at least based upon what I've observed in my work.
I was fortunate enough to coach both my girls in soccer pre-high school for a number of years, and I have some of the coaches that I coached with had boys, and I would kind of compare the two, and I would notice a couple things. One is that the boys, even after practice or after a game, they'd still kick the ball around and try to, like, still kind of. The girls, once practice was over, that was it. They didn't want to touch the ball anymore. That it was quite over. Second, what I noticed is that just the physicality. I mean, boys will go after boys and intentionally in soccer now. Some, uh, you know, slide tackle and intend not to hurt but to give notice, whereas girls are they're just get the ball up and they don't even make eye contact, they get up and they keep running, and it's just so perhaps the aggressiveness and just the kind of those 2 points I just noticed right away. Thoughts about that?
Um, I'll take this one from a parental standpoint as well. I have a 15-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter, both who play soccer relatively competitively.
Yeah.
Um, and what I would say about that is I think generally, yes, when they were younger, for sure, right? The boys are much more rough and tumble, physical.
Yeah.
My son is a big slide tackler. He's very physical, even though he's not a very big kid by nature, right? Like he kind of he embraces that. My daughter was at a very young age, she was, afraid to get hit by the ball. I don't see girls even in her age group now in middle school. You don't see a lot of slide tackles,
Right.
but I'm starting to see more comfort with the physicality. And I think that that's because I think once you start to learn how to be physical and someone teaches you to be physical and your coach encourages it and you're rewarded for it, I think women get there too. I think it takes a little bit longer because I think
Mm.
by nature it might be a little bit different. Um, but I think, I think it also depends on the environment you put them in. I've seen my kids in different clubs, and you may have had this experience where the culture of the club really matters, and the
Mm.
coaching matters. And if a coach is aggressive and they're competitive and like, they're rewarding that kind of physicality, like I think any athlete, regardless of gender, is going to either gravitate to it to be successful or they're probably going to bow out and find another club, right? So
Mm.
there's a bit of self-selection in there, but it is different. I mean, I've coached boys and girls too, and it's definitely different in terms of how you communicate and all those things. And there's a lot of reasons why that is.
One thing I notice is that when new girls come on, oh, I tell you, Mike, I can tell right away if they have an older brother. They're more aggressive. They're more, they are, and I would walk up to them and say, "How old's your brother?" And then, "How do you know I have a brother?" I could just tell. I could, because it's just got that, that fight in them. So, 99%, and we need to just talk about this briefly, of the parents were great, right? When I coached, but there were, two or three that just thought they, should be coach and want to voice their opinion and coach from the side, and oftentimes to the detriment of the coaches. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think my perspective on it has definitely evolved over time. I wasn't always in sports psychology. I started out as just a parent and I moved into sports psychology, in the last 6 or 7 years. So I've seen it from both sides, but I've always been tried to be the parent who was the one that was either coaching like you, right? Like I
Mm,
was a
mm.
coach and try to be the one that was, helping and contributing. And I definitely took exception to those things where parents would speak up. But I think I've kind of softened on that to a certain extent, meaning I get that parents want the best for their children.
Mm,
I think the way they go about doing it is just is completely wrong on so many levels. Like just that example of coaching from the sideline or thinking they could do better or the constant like screaming or the undermining of the coach, right? Like, and I think a lot of that falls on the parents because they become so emotional. Plus, they're also paying money, so they want a result, right? Like,
mm,
they're paying and like we're showing up and we're driving and spending time and it's my kid and I don't have any control. Like, all those factors, like you add them up and you get somebody who's going to a lot of times not be able to control their emotions because of all the things that they're putting in and they can't do anything about it. Like I try to understand that. I think some of it falls on the coaches because I think the key is communicating expectations up front. If I'm a coach, like this is what I'm going to accept and this is what I'm not going to accept, right? I'm coaching and you're not. If you want to coach, you can help, right? But if you don't want to coach, like this is the way I'm going to do it. If you have an issue with me, here are the channels in which you should communicate, not yelling from the sideline, not talking to your kid about my coaching, but coming to me directly and being adult, right? Like so there are definitely things that coaches can do. And listen, coaches too, like we're not trained. A lot of
mm,
coaches are volunteer. They don't have training. Not every sport like soccer has licensure. Like you just
mm.
some parents showing up. So they don't even know better half the time. So it's kind of a mixed up, jumbled up world in terms of like youth sport coaching. So like I definitely have softened because I see how complicated it is from the outside. But what I won't soften on is that parents need to understand that the impact their behavior has on their children.
That's right.
And that to me is the biggest issue, right? It's the I parents I yelling and screaming or constantly criticizing or when do I talk to my kid about their performance or I'm criticizing other kids because I think my kid's better and I'm doing that in front of my children and there's all sorts of negative things that parents will say and do and communicate that they don't realize are having a very negative impact on their child and truthfully I get a lot of that in my practice. I come in and the parent comes to me and says, Mary or Johnny's not playing well. Their confidence isn't there. I don't get it. They're not doing all these things that they were trained to do. And then you start talking to Mary and Johnny, and then you understand like the reason why that is because like they're trying to make their mom and dad happy or their mom and dad are driving them
Mm.
crazy and they can't really focus and have fun. They're worried about what they're going to have to go through after a game or even during a game to listen to their parents. And they're embarrassed and they're angry and they're ashamed and they're whatever and the parents are the ones who are like fueling that fire and they don't even get it. And so like that's where I will always speak out and I'm guilty of this too. I've told stories on other podcasts about my parenting and I get emotional and I've had my daughter tell me zip it. Dad, shut up. You're not the coach. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Like I'm
Mm.
not the coach, right? I could say whatever I want and think I know better, but I don't. It's not my team, and I have to take my hands off the wheel. Unless my kid's in danger, physical danger, they're being emotionally abused, they're being bullied. Okay, you got to step in. But if I don't like the formation, or I don't like substitutions, or I don't like that they're playing offside trap, like that is not my business. I'm not the coach. Like, get out of the way and live with it because it's not your job.
Yeah, I've had some instances where the kid just does not want to be there, and the parents are forcing them. It's terrible, and we would have to coach club level, then you coach the travel, and
Yeah.
you know, so at the club level, we've had a first meeting with all the parents and everything, and then every couple of weeks, the parents would come in, we'd all talk, and I remember it was about halfway through the season of this one particular club team, and one of the parents, I said, "Do you have any questions?" And he raised his hands, and I think he says, "We're doing a terrible job on corner kicks." And I said, that is great, great point. This is the greatest thing I've heard all night. Now we're going to dedicate 15 minutes to corner kicks. You're going to come in. We practiced on Wednesdays and Fridays. You're going to come in and you're going to handle the corner kicks. This is going to be great. And then he just kind of stepped back, and then nobody else raised their hand. So the point is, you know,
I love that.
right? And I was not mocking at all. I was excited. I said, "This is great. We now have a set piece coach. This is great." And so they if they want to speak up and they have it, we'll certainly let them in. You have this great book, right? And you level up your mental game, 10 steps for improvement. Your first one is identify the why for this year and what's the purpose. You ask the athlete that question when you talk to them?
Yeah, we talk about why are you doing this? Because especially with a super high level competitive athlete, right? Like, so I'll give you an example of an athlete I work with, and this is kind of where it comes from. She is a Division 1 athlete at a
Wow.
very high level academic institution, so very, very high level. Um, and the first few years of college were really challenging. She came in COVID year. In high school, she was like lights out, right? As you imagine, she was the fastest girl on the track. She won every race. Like, it was easy for her. Now she's coming into an environment where, they're not competing the first year because of COVID. Then the second year she comes back and she's behind the eight ball because she didn't compete for a year. Now she's competing against better athletes. She's not contributing. She's getting hurt, right? All these things are not going her way and she's
Mm,
not used to it, right? To the point where she's like, I don't even like she came to me in this like kind of state of like, I don't know what to do. Like, and I'm like, well, why are you putting yourself through 20 hours a week of practices by rule? Why are you doing more than that beyond that? Because that's kind of the way the world works. Now you're going to class, you have homework, you have a social life,
mm,
and you're
mm.
unhappy. Like, why are you running in college if it doesn't make you happy? Like, why are you doing this? And I think once you're able to identify
Hmm.
why I'm doing it, now it's like, okay, I can live with the consequences of like I'm giving up my 1 hour of my day to go lift weights or sit on the training table instead of being with my friends. I know that's more important. So I'm going to go do it. I might not love it every day, but I know that's my choice versus going in there and being miserable and like torturing yourself because like you always have a choice not to compete. I think that's tricky for me because if I've never had an athlete come to me and I do question that sometimes, like, why are you doing this? Like, would it be an option to do something else? I've never had an athlete who said to me, you know what, you're right, I'm going to walk away, and then have a
Mm,
parent come to me and be like, you're the one who told them to quit. Like, that's never happened. But I think you have to ask
hmm,
that question because in my mind, my responsibility is to the person. And if they're doing something for the wrong reasons and it's making them unhappy and it's threatening their mental health, it's threatening their physical health in some instances, depending on the workload or whatever, like, and they're just not happy, like, you have a choice, right?
mm.
And if you make a choice and you see it as a choice, now all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm opting into this activity versus like I have to do it. Because if you feel like you have to do anything, right? If I feel like I have to get up and go to work every day, what am I going to do? I'm going to go, I hate this job. This sucks. Like, I can't believe I have to go. And then you start blaming people and you start pointing fingers. And like, that's real life and it happens, but like, it's not productive. And so, like, asking them why they're doing it is really important. Some of them don't have any question about why they're doing it, right? And that's a
Mm.
different issue altogether. But some of them really struggle with the enjoyment piece of it. They don't have a motivation for it. And it's like a job. And if it feels like a job at 16, 17, 18, 21, like, what's the point? Right? There's so
Hmm.
many other things that you could be doing with your life.
Especially going from high school to D1. I mean, it's just, D1 is a serious step.
I think it's really underestimated. It's something that I'm really interested in because, like, I observed it when I was working in a high school. Like, I had these kids who were like superstar athletes who are committed to go play Division 1 sports. And I'm thinking to myself, like, how is this kid going to handle it when they're not like getting all these pats on the back and they're
Right.
just like everybody else and they're away from home and they're homesick and they're dealing with a new coaching staff who doesn't like completely trust them yet, right? Like, are they going to be able to deal with that? Like, do they have the tools?
Hmm.
And I think it's a real struggle for a lot of them because they're not used to not playing. They're not used to being the favorite. They're not used to, just being a regular, member of the team. They've always been like put on a pedestal. There's that's a hard adjustment. You have to find your place.
Certainly do. And then your next series of steps have to deal with goals, outcome, performance, and process goals. Very important for them to do this.
Yeah, and so I think everybody understands like goal right. Goal setting is like one of those things that I do with athletes so they completely get it because everybody sets goals on some level, right? Whether they're on a piece of paper or they're in our head, right? We have this idea of what we want to accomplish. But I think for me, like the outcome goal, which is that sort of result that you want, I teach that as being completely out of your control, right? It's relative to somebody else's decision. I want to play Division I college sports, football, whatever, baseball. Well,
Mm.
someone has to choose me, right? I could be the best baseball player in my state, but if someone doesn't think I'm a Division I player, then I'm not a Division I player, right? That's out of
Right.
my control. So like you want to have that something to shoot for, but underneath it, you want to have things that you can control, right? If I play better, perform better, the odds that I'm going to hit that outcome goal are going to go up, right? So we want to structure it so that, hey, I know where I want to get to. This is what I need to do to get there, right? And then ultimately the process is all those things that I can control every single day or every week. What am I doing? Are those things that I'm actually doing and completely control align with where I want to get to? If they don't align, they need to align, right? And also, can I judge myself? Can I judge success based upon those things I accomplish every day that are in my control? Can I go to bed at night going like, I don't know if I'm going to be a Division I athlete, but I feel really good about the fact that I did all these things today and I checked all those boxes and I hit my, goal for the day. Like, I think for a lot of athletes, like that is completely underestimated and like dismissed in a lot of cases. Like, this is just what I'm supposed to do every day. And like, I don't give myself credit for the fact that like I did these 5 things that nobody else is even willing to do.
Mm.
And I don't even know what the outcome is going to be a year from now, but I'm doing it anyway because it means a lot to me. Like, measuring those and doing them and checking them off is important, and structuring those goals in a proper way is really really important, so you're balancing your outcomes with your controllables.
Yeah, well said, Mike. And then your next group is a common thread that I see through so many people I talk to, and that's, journaling, gratitude, meditation, just
Mhm.
making that a regular practice of your day.
Yes, absolutely. And I think those for me fall under sort of the process heading, but they're skills, right? So,
Mm.
meditation is probably the number one thing that I will introduce on the most consistent basis because
Hmm.
my philosophy is the more you're aware of your thoughts and your feelings, the more likely you are to change those when you're not happy with them, right? And meditation for me and for other people is really had that effect of building self-awareness, of like being able to sit in stillness in the quiet with our eyes closed going, oh my god, my head is spinning with thoughts. And
Mm.
like rather than chasing every single thought that pops into our head, we're like, okay, like I know that's a negative thought, but I don't have to buy into it. I'm
Mm.
going to let it go and I'm going to just come back to whatever it is I'm doing, breathing or saying something to myself or whatever. Right. I think that's really, really important. Journaling's the same, right? Like take 5 minutes at night or 5 minutes in the morning to write down how the day went, like what you think you did well, what you want to do tomorrow. Like that's real simple stuff. It doesn't have to be
Mm.
extensive, but it's like part of a discipline, part of a practice. And then gratitude actually is probably the secret sauce in that, like, it's like, well, I get to do this, right? This is a privilege. I get to play my sport. Like I have so many good things in my life because when I see athletes, they come to me, the common denominator usually is focus on the negative. I need to fix this one thing that I'm not good at versus going, man, I'm really good at like these other 50 things, but I just like take it for granted. Like I'm good at this and I'm grateful for my coach. I'm grateful for the weight room. I'm grateful for my journal. I'm grateful for the
Hmm.
fact that I'm good at what I do and I get to do it. And like you could go on and on and on, right? But just kind of shifting that focus to, hey, like this is awesome. Like it's all of this is like something that no one else is getting to do, or I'm very, very special versus like this is a chore because like I'm not good at this one little thing and now I have to go fix it. And it feels
Hmm.
like I'm always chasing something.
And then your ninth was really surprising to me, Mike, is practice asking other humans for help daily.
It's something I'm probably most
Humility?
yeah, humility. Yeah, and I think it's not that we need help from people every day. It's not the point
Right.
necessarily. It's the practice of like when I need to ask somebody for help for real in a really difficult situation and I never do it, it's going to be really daunting to do that when the
Mm.
time comes to ask for help on something that's really, really important. So one of the things there's a couple things that inspire that for me. One is my own personal experiences of having at some points in my life to ask for help in really difficult situations, which were really, really hard and uncomfortable. And I didn't want to do it. But I know that looking back on it, like it really helped me. Right. So like I take my own experience and I apply it. The other is I hear from my athletes, like they come to me and they say, like, I don't like that I'm not starting, or I don't like a decision my coach made, or I don't like where I stand right now, or whatever it is. And then the next question is, well, do you think you could go talk to your coach? And like a lot of times it's like, well, yeah, I could, but, and it's like, I work with them to like think through that conversation and like, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? How do you want it to go? And like almost role playing it. And almost exclusively when they come back to me and they do have those conversations, they come back and say, I go, how did it go? Okay, good. It's never bad. It's either fine or this is what I expected, or it
Mm,
went great. But how, and then the next question is, how do you feel? And almost exclusively the answer is, I feel relief, right? I feel
mm,
relieved, meaning now I know where I stand. I didn't like what the coach said, but I know where I'm at and I don't have the
mm.
anxiety anymore and I can move forward, right? But you would have never known where you stood most likely if you didn't go ask the question,
Didn't
which is
ask.
why I suggest practicing it so that it
Hmm.
doesn't feel so daunting when you need it, right? You may be practicing and asking for help and you're like, I don't need any help today. Like, why am I going to ask for help? It's not the point. The point is like, go do it. Be humble, right? Humble yourself and ask somebody who knows something more than you for a piece of feedback or advice so that you could be like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Like, I'll do it again tomorrow. So, I think that's a little bit more challenging for people. It's probably the hardest thing I would ask anybody to do, frankly.
Mm. And perhaps the least difficult, your last one, is the smile.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of levity behind that, but I do think it's important, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I don't know how many times you see athletes who, like, it just everything looks like such,
Miserable.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
miserable, right?
Yeah.
They're always miserable. The facial expressions are, they're just pouting or they're super serious or they're just unhappy and like there's never any sense of joy and there's like everything is so serious. And to me, listen, there are going to be times where things are serious and you're not going to want to smile, but like if you like stop and go like, hey, like I get to compete, like this is really fun that I get to do this and I'm happy and I smile, like your body has a physical response. Like your everything lights up when you smile, right? Like, and if you feel good, like this is something I talk to athletes about all the time, and this is from sports psychology. It's not rocket science, but it is something we learn a lot about, which is my thoughts become my feelings, and my feelings become my behaviors.
Hmm.
But that also works the other way. My behavior can become my feelings, and my feelings can become my thoughts, right?
Ah.
So, like, if I smile, that makes me feel good. If I feel good, I'm going to think good. Or if I think
Mm.
feel good, I want to play good. So like if I smile, I'm probably going to feel better, which probably opens things up for me to play a little better. It takes some of the pressure off, or it just makes me feel physically, it gives me a little bit of energy. Whereas like if I'm constantly like dragging my butt through the mud because like everything's so darn hard, then it's going to be hard to perform. It's going to weigh you down.
I just happened to come off watching The Untold, their Netflix, The Swamp, which was University of Florida,
Yeah.
when they won all those champions. And my God, they were not smiling. I mean, they were miserable. I mean, and it's college football D1. There's nothing like it, right? But they, I mean, it's just so different. It's just so different back then.
Well, I think that does raise a good point, right? And I think it probably even happens now. Where what I would say about that in that case, Urban Meyer, right? Like
Mm,
this is an old school
yeah,
football coach, right? This is the way I did it when I was, when I played for Woody Hayes, and
yeah,
this wasn't fun. It was like this was like life and death,
yeah.
and that can work, right? You could scare and beat people into that like submission of like, hey, we got to go out there and win or else. But then you look today, right? You watch Colorado and Deion Sanders, like
Yeah.
those guys are having fun, right? Their coach is upbeat and positive, and they
Yes.
believe, and they're having fun, and they're playing great. So, like, what would you rather do? Would you rather win and be miserable, or would you rather win and feel great, right? And play
Mm.
great and have fun and be yourself? And like, I think there's a lot to be learned there. And I think we're all learning a lot from that example because it's so highly publicized. But I think it is a great example of what big time, big business college sports can be with the right coach and the right culture. And I think that that's really important.
Yeah, Coach Sanders certainly smiles a lot. That's for sure. And we have to remember that, the biggest money making sport in the United States is the NFL. The second is college football.
Right.
It still beats,
Yes.
NBA, hockey, baseball. It beats, so it is big business at the end of the day. So, Mike, when I started my business in the '90s, I was working way too much, not paying attention to my body, not paying attention to what I was eating, working way too many hours. I got myself up to 340 pounds,
Wow.
barely even. Yeah, it was horrible. Doctor says to me, my daughter was just born. If you don't lose the weight, you're not going to see her graduate. So I spent the next 6, 7 months. I lost about 130 pounds. And people ask me when I tell them that, I can just see it in their eyes, right, Mike? How'd you do it? What's your secret? And I said, there's no secret. Discipline. That's how I did it. Just discipline. I got focused. I got discipline. I wanted to do it. How does discipline play a role in your life, Mike Huber?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, it starts with motivation, right? In your instance, right? Like the motivation that you described to lose the weight was about your why. I'm
Yeah.
doing this for
Mm.
my children. And like that's the most important thing. And
Mm.
so the ability to maintain the discipline, right, is in that. And I actually, I mean, it's played a role in my own life. So experientially, before I even got into sports psychology, I had the experience of having a gambling addiction. And 11 years ago, I got clean from gambling, and it was the same idea, right? It's something I'd done my whole life for
Wow.
25 years. And I started when I was a kid, and I finished when I was 37. And at 37, I got tired of it, and I said, "This is what I need to do for myself to get better." And then it became a lot of the things that I share with athletes now was inspired by my own experience of showing up at a meeting and talking about what's going on in my life and writing in a journal and getting on my knees and saying a prayer or reading from a book or admitting that I had a problem and that I needed help, right? All
Mm.
those things are like connected to the work that I do. That's how I got into sports psychology. I didn't want to work in the addiction field, and I got enough of that in my own life, and but like that inspired me to go into a field helping other people. So like to me, the way I present things to people is when I'm coaching them is like, if you want this, here are the things I think you should do or could
Mm.
do to make it better. If you choose not to do them, I'm not going to be mad, right? There's just a consequence, right? You did something else or you didn't do something because there was something more important to you. And that's just fine, right? But if it's not the most important thing and you don't do it, like, don't be surprised when you get the outcome that you get, right? Like, and in your case, right? Like, you could have said, like, I'm going to lose 140 pounds and then kept doing what you're doing. Like you're going to keep getting what you got, if you keep doing what you're doing. And so like, it's the same thing kind of with my business. I started this business 3 years ago. Like, you know what it's like to start a business. It sounds like, right? Like in the beginning, like that is the most important thing. Right. And a lot of things do slide to the side because it's like, I got to keep going. I got to keep doing more. You have discipline in that part of your life, but then other stuff gets away from you. But then you
Mm.
got to bring it back and say, what's more important, my health and my kids or my business? And only you can make that choice. And you did, which I think is awesome. And I think just goes back to the conversation about coaching, right? Like understanding people, sometimes they think they want things that they're not prepared to do. And that's
Mm.
okay. And like, that's the way I treat it. It's like, this is your choice. And I think people really appreciate that because there's a sense of control in that. Like, hey, this guy's not telling me what to do, right? He's just saying, here are the things I could do to get better. And if I really want to, I'm going to do them. And if I don't, that's okay too. He's not going to judge me. Like, I like being in that role. I'm not a guy who's going to tell you what to do because at the end of the day, you wouldn't have lost 140 pounds if somebody told you to. You decided to do it. Just like I decided to stop gambling because I wanted to do it. If someone had told me, no, you need to stop doing this, I would have told them to take a walk, right? So I think that that's a big part of it.
Yeah, giving advice. I agree with you, Mike. Giving advice is a slippery slope. When somebody asks me for my advice, I say, "Well, here's a situation that I had was similar,
Right,
and this is what I did, and it worked or it didn't work, and what I would have done differently." I'm not good enough to give,
right.
and I'm very grateful if somebody asks. But I say, this is, my experience. Perhaps you could learn from it. What motivates you, Mike?
Helping other people. I mean, just flat out, that is the most gratifying thing that I do every single day. I mean, it's interesting because like I love a lot of people hate business, right? They love what they do, but they hate running a business. Really enjoy running a business, right? But it's
Mm,
really hard. When I sit down though with a client and that hour that I spend with them, or that 45 minutes that I spend with them, leading up to that, I'm thinking, oh, I have to go to work. And then I get in that meeting or I sit down with them or I get on a Zoom or whatever it is that we're doing. And like that goes away. It doesn't feel like work anymore. I'm here to help this person. And like I get to do that every single day to help them get better and be what they want to be. And like that's a privilege. And like that again is like just another connection point to the things that I coach because I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just telling you what it did for me. Give it a try. You know what I'm saying? Try it for yourself and see if it works. But to your point, right? Like I'm not here to tell you what to do. Like I don't know you. I don't walk in your shoes, so I can't tell you what to do. I just can support you and maybe give you some ideas.
Hell, Mike, I barely know what to do to myself. I can't be
Right.
giving, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, I make poor decisions constantly, you know? I try to strive to be better, but so then how do you measure success?
That's that's a great question and a hard one to answer, and I think that's one of the real big challenges in our field is that measuring results is really, really difficult in a concrete
Mm,
way. It's not like we can strap a heart monitor on an athlete and say like, "Oh, your heart sped up or slowed down," or
mm,
you lost 5 pounds or you gained 5 pounds or you cut a second off your time. Like sports psychology, we have a hard time sort of having those sorts of concrete metrics. So the way I measure success, at least for my clients, is do you feel like it's working? Do you feel better?
mm,
Are you playing better? Like, do you want to come back to these meetings thinking that there's more help to be had? And that assessment of results really comes through the asking the questions, right? Like,
mm,
how are you doing? Is it getting better? Are you happy? Now, a lot of that's self-reported. Sometimes people tell you what they, they think you want to hear, and that's certainly a risk. I can't make them be honest with me, but I think if I do my job correctly, they'll trust me enough to say, "Hey, like this isn't working. I don't want to do this." Okay, let's try something else. And I tell them right up front, like, if this isn't working for you, you need to tell me so I can help you. Right. Because if I don't know it's not working, I'm going to just keep trying it. Like, so yeah, it's tricky though. We do, I think sometimes in our field struggle to measure results because everything is so abstract and it's so unique to the individual.
yeah, it's very how do you feel is a great question, it's just, getting the results from that. Mike, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. You do a great job on your podcast, the Freshman
Thank
Foundation
you.
podcast, and I was really excited when you accepted this. I really thank you for your time. Anybody who's listening, how can they get in touch with you?
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate it for having me. I love having these conversations. Best way to find me is to go to my website. It's Michael, V as in Vincent Huber.com. There you can find contact information. You can contact me through the site, free resources there that you can download, blogs, podcasts, a whole bunch of stuff, my socials. Everything's right there. So I would send you there and hopefully if you have an interest, reach out. I'd love to hear from you. We can talk, answer questions, whatever, no obligation.
Yeah, Michael V is in, they say Victor Huber, HUBER.com. You got Facebook, you're in LinkedIn, you're in YouTube, great YouTube channel, lots of great content,
Thank you.
Instagram, really great. And Mike, I really, really appreciate your time. Perhaps if we meet somewhere in the middle, we'll get a cup of coffee.
That sounds great, Joey. Thank you for having me.
You be well.
You too.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations.